Invisible Rank Part 1. The smallest name on the roster. The locker room smelled of chlorine and steam and the particular kind of exhaustion that only military mornings produce. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that flat, unforgiving white that reveals every flaw, every shadow, every detail you might otherwise miss. Maya Reeves moved through the room the way she moved through most space, quietly, efficiently, with the practiced awareness of someone who had long ago learned to map exits before she mapped anything else. Her red hair was plastered dark against her skull. Freckles stood out sharp across her nose and cheeks, the way they always did when her skin was flushed from cold water. She was 5'2" on a good day, 112 pounds. She looked like someone's kid's sister who had wandered into the wrong building. She was reaching for the shower curtain when Jade Webb turned the corner too fast. The bag caught Maya's shoulder. Not hard, just unexpected. The towel slipped. 3 seconds, maybe less. But 3 seconds is enough. Jade's phone was already in her hand. She had been photographing the facility all morning for her parents, trying to capture the world her brother Marcus had entered. The camera app was open. The shutter clicked once before her brain caught up to her reflexes. What the photograph showed was not what Jade had expected to see. Not Maya's body, which the towel still mostly covered. What stopped Jade mid-apology, what made her hand move to her mouth, what made her take one slow step backward was what hung around Maya's neck on a simple ball chain. 2 sets of military dog tags gleaming under the harsh light like something that had no business being there. The first set bore Maya's own name, standard issue, and a rank that did not belong on any recruit in this facility. Lieutenant Commander, 04, United States Navy. The second set carried a different name, a different service number. But Jade had been a Navy yeoman for 4 years before she got out. She knew what KIA meant. She knew what Syria meant. She knew what March 2022 meant. Commander Claire Stratton. Maya's eyes found Jade's face. Something moved behind those green eyes, something that had nothing to do with a petite woman who had been struggling through morning formations all week. It was there for less than a second. Then it was gone, replaced by a stillness so complete it was almost frightening. Jade stammered an apology, said she would delete it. They both knew the damage was done. The photo uploaded to the base's internal social network before Jade could stop it. Her caption was innocent. 8 words. Mystery woman in recruit training has commander rank. The screen went dark. White text appeared. Naval Special Warfare Training Facility, Coronado, California, 72 hours earlier. The military transport bus groaned through the last turn before the main gate suspension, complaining about the weight of 25 people and everything they were carrying. Gear ambition, fear dressed up as confidence, and in some cases the particular quiet of people who had already decided they would not fail, regardless of what failure actually cost them. Late afternoon sun came through salt-stained windows at a low angle. The Pacific appeared and disappeared between buildings like something that could not make up its mind. Maya sat near the back with her forehead against the cool glass, watching the ocean. She had made this drive before, more times than she could count, but never like this, wearing fatigues 3 sizes too large boots that the supply depot had promised were the smallest they had, which still felt like wearing 2 small boats. She had rolled the cuffs 4 times. The belt was cinched as tight as it went. None of it helped much. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like. That was the point. From 3 rows back, a voice carried easily over the engine noise. Marcus Webb, former college linebacker, University of Michigan. Shoulders built for a different kind of violence, biceps straining against a uniform that actually fit him. He was not trying to be cruel. He was trying to be funny, which sometimes amounted to the same thing. Look at that, he said, not quietly. She wearing her big brother's uniform. Laughter moved through the bus. Not everyone, but enough. Grady Flynn sitting midway back with hands like slabs of concrete from 15 years swinging hammers and pouring foundations across Greater Boston, forearms mapped with faded worksite tattoos, did not laugh. He glanced at Maya, estimated the situation, and looked back out his own window with the practiced indifference of a man who had learned long ago to conserve energy. She's on the wrong bus, someone added. Dana Holt, seated 4 rows ahead of Maya, said nothing. She had spent 11 years reading people for a living, first as a patrol officer in Roxbury, then 5 years in plainclothes, then a year with Boston PD's Tactical Response Unit, before she walked out of the precinct one afternoon and did not go back. Dana was watching Maya the way she used to watch suspects in interview rooms. Not with suspicion, exactly. With the careful attention of someone taking inventory. The woman had not reacted. That was the first thing Dana noticed. Not the practiced restraint of someone biting back anger. Not the tight jaw of someone enduring humiliation, just nothing. Like the comments were weather. Like she had heard every variation of this exact joke so many times that her nervous system had simply stopped filing it as information worth processing. Dana filed that away. Ethan Moore sat by himself near the front, earbuds in, but nothing playing. 23 years old California bronze, the quiet kind of lean that came from spending 6 hours a day in the ocean rather than a gym. He was staring at nothing. His eyes had a weight to them that did not match his age, the specific gravity of someone carrying something they had not put down in a long time. The bus hissed to a stop inside the main gate. The drill instructors were already waiting. Master Chief Raymond Warren stood at the front of the formation like something carved from compressed weather. 52 years old, 27 years in the United States Navy. His face held the particular texture of a man who had spent decades outdoors in places where the outdoors was trying to kill him. His chest held enough ribbons to tell a story that took a long time to read. His eyes, pale gray and precise, moved along the line of recruits with the efficiency of something that did not miss. He reached Maya. He stopped. He looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than the moments he had given anyone else. Not contemptuous, not amused. Something closer to what a structural engineer looks like when he walks onto a bridge and something in the geometry does not add up. "Miss," he said, his voice was not unkind, "are you certain you're in the correct program?" 25 pairs of eyes turned to look at her. Maya met his gaze and held it. "Yes, Master Chief." SEAL prep training is extremely demanding, physically, mentally. There are other programs that might be more appropriate for someone of your... He paused, searching for language that was accurate without being what he did not want to be. Stature. "I'm aware of the requirements, Master Chief. I'm here for SEAL prep." Something moved through Warren's expression. Not respect yet, not dismissal. Something more honest than either the look of a man who has been surprised enough times in 27 years to know that surprise is always possible, but who has also learned to wait for evidence before updating his assumptions. He nodded once, sharp and final, moved on. At the back of the formation, Senior Chief Decker watched all of this. He was 54 years old and had not been required to be anywhere for nearly 3 years since the day he submitted his retirement paperwork, and they processed it with the efficiency of people who understood exactly what they were losing. He had come back as a voluntary observer at Warren's request officially. Unofficially, he had come back because of a name on a roster he had seen 2 weeks ago, and because in 31 years of service, he had learned that certain things were not coincidences even when they presented themselves that way. He watched Maya Reeves stand at attention while Warren walked away. He watched the way she held herself, the precise distribution of weight, the angle of the chin, the particular quality of stillness that was not passivity but control, the difference between a pool with no current and a pool where the current was running very deep and very quiet. He had seen that quality once before, in a different person, a long time ago. He turned away without saying anything. He would not be saying anything. Not yet. There was a sequence to things, and the sequence mattered more than the urgency he felt. That evening, after processing medical checks, Gear issued the endless paperwork that translated human beings into data points, Maya carried her equipment to Barracks B and began unpacking with movements so precise and automatic that Dana Holt, watching from across the room, felt the hair on her arms rise slightly. It was not simply that Maya knew the regulations. Every recruit had been handed the same regulations pamphlet that afternoon. It was that her hands moved through the process the way a pianist's hands move through a piece they have played 10,000 times, not thinking about the notes because the notes lived below the level of thought. Socks folded in thirds, shirts pressed flat, collars aligned, boots side by side, heel to heel, laces tucked inside rather than tied. The woman had been in uniform for less than 6 hours. She moved like someone who had been in uniform for years. Dana said, "You've served before." Maya did not look up. "I haven't. Not officially. Not yet." She kept moving, placing each item in its exactly correct position. Dana watched her for another moment, then turned back to her own locker. Not officially. Not yet. 2 ways to read that sentence. Dana was already filing both of them. In the main bay, Marcus Webb held court the way people with natural gravity always did, not trying to command the room, just unable to help it. He talked about his grandfather who had served in the Pacific in World War II and come home without ever talking about it. His father who had done 2 tours in the Gulf War and come home with something different behind his eyes and told his son more than once never to do this. Marcus had joined anyway. 3 generations. He said it like a man who needed to believe the phrase meant something. Grady Flynn sat nearby quieter, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He had dropped out of high school at 16, spent 15 years doing work that left calluses on top of calluses, and a particular clarity about what he was and was not capable of without anyone's permission. He was not here to prove anything to the world. He was here to prove something to the part of himself that had believed the people who told him he was not enough. Ethan Morse had found a corner and stayed in it. He had not mentioned his brother yet. He would not mention his brother for several more days. But the reason he was here was sitting right behind his eyes, visible to anyone who knew what grief looked like when it had been living inside someone for 3 years and had nowhere else to go. Maya lay on her bunk after lights out, listening to the conversations move through the barracks like water finding its level. She thought about Claire Stratton, about the building in Syria, about what it cost when the people who should have listened chose instead to maintain the shape of what they had already decided. She thought about her father, about Fallujah, about the man she had never really known, except through the stories her mother told reluctantly, and through the particular quality of the silence in their house in the years after the specific weight of an absence that had a name and a face and a uniform that was folded now in a box on the top shelf of a closet in Annapolis. She thought about the phone call with her mother last April, about what promises were for, and whether a promise made out of someone else's fear was a promise you were actually obligated to keep. She pressed the back of her hand flat against her sternum, not reaching, just feeling the slight weight of the tags there, the warmth they had taken from her skin over the course of the day. Claire had carried her own tags for 16 years before Syria, had probably touched them in the same absent way in the dark of many other nights in many other places. That thought was something she could rest on. She let her breathing slow. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. She was asleep before the count finished. Day 1 began at 0430 with Warren and a metal trash can lid and a voice that could strip paint off a wall. Maya had been awake for 5 minutes already. Her internal clock had made its adjustment years ago and never fully reversed. She lay still while chaos erupted around her. Recruits stumbling, reaching for uniforms in emergency lighting, somebody hitting the edge of a bunk with a sound that promised a bruise, and then she moved. Uniform laid out the night before. Boots beside the bed, laces prepared. She was dressed, laced, and standing at her bunk in 90 seconds. Grady Flynn, moving fast for a man his size, reached formation in 2 minutes 14 seconds. Dana Holt, a minute 45. Ethan Morse was still tucking in his shirt when Warren started the count. Nobody was looking at Maya. That was fine. The 5-mile run began at 0545, with the sun not yet fully above the horizon and the Pacific doing what it always did, existing enormous and indifferent beyond the perimeter fence. Warren set a pace at the front designed to identify within the first half-mile who had actually prepared and who had assumed that wanting something badly enough was a form of preparation. Maya ran in the middle of the pack, not because the pace was challenging, because running at the front would have required an explanation she was not ready to give yet. She kept her breathing on a 4-count box pattern and watched the group spread out ahead of her like a deck of cards being sorted by a hand she could not see. Mile 3. Marcus Webb began to fall apart. It happened the way it always happened with athletes built for explosive power, rather than sustained effort, not a collapse but a slow deterioration. His breathing became wrong. His gait began to weave. His face had moved through 3 shades of color in the space of a quarter mile. Maya closed the distance without making it look intentional. Came up alongside him on his left, away from the drill instructors running the flanks. "Small sips if you've got water," she said, quiet enough that the wind almost took it. "Control your breathing, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Longer exhales than inhales. Your body is fighting itself right now. Stop fighting." He looked at her. The look contained approximately 12 different things, but surprise was the dominant one. "Practice," she said before he could ask. She held that pace beside him for 30 seconds, long enough for him to find the rhythm, and then let the distance between them open again, drifting back toward the middle of the pack. Warren's eyes swept the group from the front. He had not seen anything conclusive. But something had registered the way things registered when you had spent 27 years watching people under pressure and had learned to pay attention to the small things that did not add up. Marcus finished the run. He looked at the back of Maya's head for a long time afterward, trying to reconcile 2 things that did not fit together in any framework he currently possessed. Day 2 brought the obstacle course, 2 acres of design suffering. Rope climbs, wall scaling, cargo nets, mud crawls, balance elements, each station engineered to test not one thing but several things simultaneously. The group was divided into teams of 5. Maya was grouped with Marcus, Dana, Grady, and Ethan. The rope climb was 30 feet of thick hemp with no footholds and no assists. Marcus powered up through sheer muscle mass. Effective, but expensive. Dana climbed steadily with police training evident in every transition. Grady struggled construction worker bulk designed for horizontal force, not vertical, and made it through raw will. Ethan made it look almost easy. Then Maya. She gripped the rope at the bottom and went. What happened in the next 11 seconds was not what anyone expected. Her technique was not recreational climbing. It was military rope climb, the method taught in advanced infantry school, the same method codified in naval special warfare curriculum, the method that looked effortless precisely because it was the product of hundreds of repetitions until the body stopped thinking about it and simply executed. She reached the top in 11 seconds, descended controlled. The course instructor said, "Where did you learn to climb like that?" Good instructor back home in rock climbing. That wasn't rock climbing technique. He used to be military. She moved toward the next station. The instructor watched her go, then he picked up his radio. Warren was already on his way. The hand-to-hand session came that afternoon on the padded training surface. Most recruits were at the level you would expect after their first days. Some aptitudes, some awkwardness, the gap between knowing what to do and being able to do it when stress was present. Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, who ran the combatives program, had been watching Maya move through the warm-up sequences with an expression that was becoming more thoughtful by the minute. She was doing nothing that should have attracted specific attention. Each movement was exactly and only what was required. But there was a quality to it, the automatic translation of intent into action, that spoke of something different from training received recently. Hayes called Dana forward, called Maya to face her. Standard rear chokehold. Dana to apply. Maya to defend and counter. Dana moved behind Maya and applied the whole textbook firm enough to simulate a real threat without injury. Firm enough that most recruits would begin trying to pull the arm away with their hands, which accomplished nothing. What happened next took 2.7 seconds. Twist 1. Maya tucked her chin, raised her near arm in the telephone receiver position to protect her airway, gripped Dana's choking arm simultaneously with both hands, dropped her weight, turned her hips. The rotation broke Dana's base. Before Dana could adjust, Maya continued through the turn, took her to the ground, transitioned to mount position, secured both arms, and applied a rear naked choke with the hooks in. Every element of this sequence was from Naval Special Warfare Close Quarters Combat Curriculum. Level 3, the level that took years to encode below conscious thought. Dana tapped. Maya released immediately and they both stood. The training area went quiet in the particular way spaces go quiet when something has happened that changes the nature of what everyone thought they were watching. Hayes stepped onto the mat. He was former Force Recon Marine. He had trained with SEAL instructors. He knew exactly what he had just witnessed. Miss Reeves, that technique, where exactly did you learn it? Self-defense classes. Back home, I had a thorough instructor. That was not self-defense. That was SEAL Close Quarters Combat Level 3. The counter you used is from Advanced Naval Special Warfare Curriculum. That curriculum is not taught to civilians. He paused. I'm going to ask you one time, where did you learn that? Every set of eyes in the training area was on her. Maya held his gaze, said nothing for 2 full seconds. Then I had a good instructor, someone who believed in being thorough. Hayes studied her for a long moment. Finally, whatever training you've had, it shows. Consider helping the others with their technique. He stepped back, dismissed. It was an acknowledgement and a decision to let it go for now, and a promise that he would be watching differently going forward. Warren, standing at the edge of the training area, had seen everything. He walked back to his office, sat down, and opened his notepad. He drew a 4th column and wrote her name at the top of it. Twist 2. That night at 22:47, Warren's phone lit up. The notification was from the base's internal social network. A photo was spreading, first 4 times shared, then 12, then faster. He enlarged the image with 2 fingers. The face was partially obscured, turned at an angle. But the build matched. The red hair matched. And those tags. Those were the tags of a senior officer, a rank that had no possible innocent explanation for its presence around the neck of a candidate in SEAL preparatory training. He opened his secure messaging application, typed, "Need to discuss candidate Reeves. Have information that suggests her background is not what has been represented." Mercer's response came in under 3 minutes. "My office. 600 tomorrow. Come alone." Warren set the phone on his desk and looked out the window toward the barracks where his recruits were sleeping or trying to. He had 27 years of experience telling him something large was happening. He had a phone message telling him he was right. He estimated approximately 6 hours before whatever this was became something he could not manage alone. He poured his cold coffee down the sink and began writing notes in longhand. The old way, the way you wrote things when you needed to be sure of them. In the barracks, Maya lay in the dark. She could feel the shift that had happened today, the edges that had been revealed during the hand-to-hand session, the calculations that were now running in people's heads. The photo was spreading. She did not know about the photo yet, but she understood that concealment had a shelf life, and today had shortened it considerably. She had a mission that required she stay hidden. She had a conscience that kept making different calculations. She was going to have to walk that line every day she was here, and today had shown her how narrow the line was and how many directions it was possible to fall off it. She let her breathing slow and stayed very still in the dark, and eventually the dark did what it always did, which was pass. Part 2. The Weight of Water. The pool at Naval Special Warfare Training Facility was enormous and cold and honest in the way that all water was honest. It did not accommodate pretense. You could hide a great many things on land: your fear, your limitations, the distance between who you claimed to be and who you actually were. The water stripped all of that away with a patience that was almost courteous. Chief Petty Officer Navarro had been watching candidates go into that pool for 15 years. He had seen every variation of human response to cold water and exhaustion, and the particular species of panic that arrived around minute 18 of a 30-minute treading exercise with 40 pounds of gear pulling you toward the bottom. He lined the recruits up at the pool's edge at 0830 and briefed the evolution without decoration. 30 minutes treading water in full gear. 40 pounds. Water temperature 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia onset for the average person began around minute 20. No contact with walls or bottom. No assistance between candidates. Any signal to the safety divers meant you were done, and done was permanent. He looked at Maya Reeves once at the end of the line in her wetsuit that had been rolled at the sleeves and ankles and made to work through improvisation in the kind of practical stubbornness that had nothing to do with size. He looked at her and she looked back at him with green eyes that were completely still, and he moved on. 25 recruits entered the water. The first 10 minutes were survivable for most of them. Adrenaline and determination were powerful fuels in the short term. The problems arrived as they always did when the fuel thinned. Maya moved to her designated zone and settled into the egg beater kick she had been using in cold water since she was 19 years old. Legs working in small alternating circles below the surface upper body, calm hands sculling in barely perceptible arcs at her sides. She could sustain this for 2 hours. The water was cold, but cold was just information, and information was manageable. What was not manageable was watching Marcus Webb deteriorate to her left. He was at minute 11 when the signs became clear. His breathing had changed cadence. His kicks were losing the rhythm that separated efficient treading from expensive treading. His head was dropping incrementally, coming up each time with slightly less authority than the time before. A man used to using his body as a battering ram was discovering that the battering ram approach had a high maintenance cost in sustained cold water. Maya was 10 feet from him. Direct contact between candidates during the evolution was grounds for disqualification. She moved closer without touching him, positioning herself where her voice could reach him below the ambient noise of the facility. "Egg beater," she said. "Watch my legs." He found her with his eyes. The desperation in them was the kind that people tried to hide and could not. She demonstrated below the surface. Small circles. Alternating. Let the legs carry the load and let the arms rest. The principle was conservation, not fighting the water, but negotiating with it, which was an entirely different thing. Marcus tried it. His first attempts were graceless. But the body learned fast when the alternative was sinking, and within 90 seconds something had shifted. His head stabilized. His breathing found a longer rhythm. He was going to finish. At minute 18, Grady Flynn was in trouble from a different direction. Not panic, Grady Flynn was constitutionally resistant to panic. What he had was a problem of technique, accumulating into a problem of physics. Too much effort applied incorrectly for too long, and now the debt was arriving in the form of muscles that had been asking for a break since minute 12. He was too far for Maya to reach without crossing into his zone. She raised her voice enough to cross the distance, aim precisely. Vertical position. Stop fighting it. Let the water support you. He heard her. The pride lost the argument with the survival instinct. He made the adjustment. It was not elegant, but it was enough. Minute 30. Navarro's whistle cut across the facility. 18 recruits climbed out. 7 had failed. Maya came up the ladder with her excess wetsuit streaming water. Her breathing elevated only slightly, the way breathing elevated after a brisk walk on a cool morning, not after 30 minutes in hypothermic water with 40 pounds of gear. She wrung water from the rolled sleeves with automatic efficiency. Navarro walked over. His voice was professional, but there was something underneath the professionalism. Now the quality of a man who has had a conversation with the evidence, and the evidence is refusing to be reasonable. Where did you learn to move in water like that? I grew up on the California coast. Free diving, surfing. That was not recreational technique. That was combat swimmer stroke, naval special warfare method. The egg beater you demonstrated your breath, hold your spatial orientation, those are not recreational skills. Before Navarro could push further, the door to the pool facility opened. Senior Chief Decker walked in with the unhurried pace of a man who moved through every space as though he had been there many times before. He crossed to Navarro, said 2 quiet sentences, and Navarro's posture shifted in the way that postures shifted when a man with 30 years less institutional gravity was speaking to a man with 30 years more. Navarro called a 5-minute break and walked away. Twist 3. Decker turned to Maya. He was 54 years old and had the face of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment longer than he was going to admit. He looked at her for a moment before he spoke, and the looking was the kind that carried the weight of a long time and a long distance. Colonel James Reeves, and he said, Bud/S Class 189, 1993. Maya went very still. He trained me. 23 years old, I thought I was going to die on day 4 of Hell Week, and your father sat down next to me on a beach at 2 in the morning and told me that quitting was always available and not quitting was also always available, and the only question was which one I was going to choose. He paused. You hold the rope exactly the way he held it, same hand angle, same breath count on the descent. I recognized you the first morning. The pool was loud around them with the sounds of recruits recovering and water draining and equipment being moved. In the middle of all of it, these 2 people were standing in a quiet that belonged entirely to them. He was one of the best men I served near, Decker said. What happened in Fallujah was not what should have happened. He stopped. Started again. I've been carrying something for 31 years that belongs to your family, but not yet. You'll know when. He looked at her for one more second with eyes that contained something old and careful and resolved. Then he walked away before the professionalism of the situation demanded that either of them explain what had just been said. Phase 2 of the water evolution was the underwater navigation course. 6 hoops at varying depths, 3 obstacles, a zero visibility section constructed with black canvas, and an object retrieval at 15 feet. 10 minutes. Surface before completion or exceed the time limit and you were done. Cole completed it in 6 minutes 45 seconds. Marcus made it at 9:52 barely and knew it. Dana posted 7:30 solid and efficient. Grady crossed the line at 9:15 through the combination of spatial instinct and sustained refusal that had gotten him through most of the hard things in his life. 4 recruits failed. Then Maya entered the water. Navarro stood at the edge with a stopwatch. He had a number in his head, 347, the course record, and was watching it the way you watched a number you had held for a long time when something in the air suggested it was about to change. She entered the water with almost no splash. Her body angled and descended, and then she was simply gone, moving through the underwater space with a quality that the people watching on deck would later struggle to describe accurately. Not swimming through the water, moving with it. The distinction was technical, and also something more than technical. She found the first hoop and was through it before most people in the same position would have confirmed its location. Through the second, the third, her body position, horizontal reducing drag to almost nothing. Every movement had purpose and only purpose. The wall penetration that had stymied 2 other candidates she passed through without breaking momentum. The cargo net she navigated with patient, methodical movements that avoided entanglement entirely. The pipe crawl she entered without hesitation, her body adapting instantly to the confined space. The black canvas section swallowed her at the 2-minute mark. Navarro watched his stopwatch. The recruits on deck watched the canvas. The canvas gave back nothing. At 2 minutes 40 seconds, she emerged her trajectory exact and descended immediately to 15 feet. She reached for the waterproof container with the reflective tape without pausing, without appearing to examine the other 2 options, and pushed off the bottom. She surfaced at 3 minutes 47 seconds. The pool area was completely silent. Navarro stared at his stopwatch with the expression of a man confronting a mathematical result he had not expected from the inputs. He looked at Maya pulling herself from the water with zero apparent fatigue. He looked back at the stopwatch. He walked over. That was not recreational diving, he said, his voice having lost most of its professional neutrality. That was combat swimmer stroke, a breath hold of 2 minutes 40 seconds in a navigation context. That was naval special warfare. The door behind him opened. Admiral Prescott walked in. Twist 4, he was 62 years old and had spent 40 years making decisions that did not come with the option of being wrong. He walked through this pool facility with the bearing of a man who moved through every space as though the space had been arranged around him, and he stopped in front of the assembled recruits, all 15 who had survived the morning. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at Maya. "Lieutenant Commander Maya Reeves," he said, not loudly, clearly. 8 years Naval Special Warfare. 6 years SEAL Team 3. The pool facility went so quiet that the water filtration system became suddenly audible. Marcus Webb made a sound that was not quite a word. Navarro's jaw had stopped in the vicinity of an open position. Warren, who had arrived in the facility 3 minutes earlier and positioned himself near the door because he had known from the meeting with Mercer that morning that something like this was approaching Warren, was looking at Maya with an expression that contained 27 years of professional confidence in the process of being quietly permanently rearranged. Maya stood in her rolled-up wetsuit, water pooling around her feet, and looked back at the Admiral without changing expression. She had known this moment was approaching. You could see the knowing in her, the quality of someone who has been carrying a weight and has just watched it begin to put itself down. Prescott said, "My office, 1 hour." He walked out. The room stayed quiet for another few seconds. Then everyone moved at once. In the hour between the pool and the Admiral's office, the day produced an interruption that no one had scheduled. The call came through the facility radio system at 10:47. A commercial fishing vessel 42 feet had capsized approximately 1.8 miles offshore near Point Loma. 4 people aboard, 2 visible on debris, both showing signs of hypothermia and exhaustion in building seas. 2 more unaccounted for, presumed trapped in the hull structure, which was partially submerged and rotating slowly with the current. Coast Guard response time 25 minutes. Estimated breathable air remaining in the hull's pocket 30 minutes or less, accounting for the rate of water ingress. That math did not produce a comfortable answer. Navarro was already moving when Warren caught him. 3 minutes of logistics, 2 safety divers, a medical tech, a response boat. The recruits were told to stand by on shore. Maya was walking toward the equipment room. Warren did not stop her. On the shore, as the response boat was being readied, a man stood apart from the rescue coordinator group with binoculars raised. He was watching the operation's preparation with an expression that was not admiration and was not simple professional assessment either. He watched the way people watched things they were trying to categorize quickly for reasons that were not obvious from the outside. No one introduced him or explained his presence. He was simply there in the uniform of a lieutenant commander watching. Maya would not know his name until he offered it himself. By then she would not need it. Twist 5. The response boat cut through building swells with controlled violence. Maya stood near the bow with the cold coming off the water into her face and the weight of the gear right and familiar across her shoulders. Navarro briefed her on the 2 minutes to the vessel, 2 visible victims, showing clear signs of cold and exhaustion, 2 more presumed in the hull with a depleting air pocket in an inverted and rotating structure. "Your call on scene," he said. "The visible victims first. Get them on the boat and treated. Then I go under the hull." "That's extremely dangerous. The structure is unstable. We should wait for Coast Guard's dive team." "The trapped victims don't have 20 minutes. She looked at him once. "I've done it in worse." He did not ask where or when. The first victim was a middle-aged man clinging to a seat cushion with the mechanical grip of someone whose hands were no longer receiving reliable information from their nervous system. Maya came in behind him, cross-chest carry, securing his arms, keeping his airway above the surface with her body positioned between him and the direction of the swells. "I've got you," she said. "Stop fighting. I will not let go. Trust me. Breathe." 3 words in a particular combination and a particular tone she had learned years ago could cut through almost any level of panic, not because of the words themselves, but because of the absolute absence of doubt in the delivery. She towed him towards the boat in long strokes, and the safety divers helped him over the side, and the medical tech began the hypothermia protocol immediately. The second visible victim was a teenage boy. He tried to grab her face to face when she came too close. She adjusted without thinking, circling behind him, wrapping across his chest, and the command in her voice did what it had done with the man before him. 2 visible victims on the boat. Medical underway. She looked at the hull, then she took 3 controlled breaths and dove. What was under the capsized hull was not a space that encouraged staying. Debris turned slowly in the current. Light that reached this far was fractured and dim. The spatial references the human brain depended on for orientation had been systematically removed by the inversion of the structure and the murk of disturbed water. She moved by touch and by the internal map she built the moment she went under, cataloging each piece of structure. She passed hull ribs, a bench bolted to what was now the overhead, the housing of the engine compartment, the narrow passage that led toward the forward section. She found them there. The air pocket was real, roughly 18 inches between the water surface and the inverted hull. In it, a woman in her mid-40s with her left arm held at an angle that described a fracture without requiring explanation. An older man in his 70s with a head wound that had been bleeding long enough to matter. She surfaced into the pocket, 14 inches of air above the water. "I'm going to get you out," she said, "one at a time. Listen to exactly what I tell you and do exactly that." 2 dives, 3 minutes each. The woman first controlled darkness. The broken arm protected the airway, maintained the transfer to the safety divers, executed with both people intact. Then back down for the older man, who was closer to unconscious than she preferred, but lighter than the woman and whose head wound had not yet produced the volume of blood loss that would make the next 10 minutes academic. 18 minutes total. 3 dives. When she came up the final time with the older man secured, the Coast Guard helicopter was arriving from the north. All 4 victims were alive. All 4 would recover. She pulled herself onto the response boat and sat with her back against the gunnel, water running off everything. Her hands were steady. Her breathing had the quality of deep exhaustion, not the shallow, rapid breathing of someone who had been frightened, but the long, slow drawing down of reserves that had been spent on something that required them. Navarro sat down beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. 15 years, he said finally. That's the most technically complete rescue operation I've seen. Maya looked at the water. Just doing the job, Chief. He shook his head once slowly. No, ma'am, that wasn't just the job. Neither of them said anything else on the way back to shore. The dock was crowded when the boat came in. 15 recruits at the front, arranged not by design but by the pull of something they had all felt simultaneously when the radio call had come through and they had been told to stand by on shore. They had watched through binoculars and with naked eyes and with the growing complicated understanding of people seeing something that did not fit the category they had been using for the person performing it. Maya stepped onto the dock. Marcus Webb was the first person she saw. The expression on his face was not the face of a man who had been condescending to someone on a bus 3 days ago. It was the face of someone who had been wrong in a particular direction for a particular amount of time and was now standing at the exact place where the wrongness ended and something else began. Admiral Prescott stood at the back of the group. He was watching without expression. She stopped. She looked at the faces in front of her. They deserved the truth, not because they had earned it through any particular action, but because they were people and she had looked them in the eye for 3 days while carrying something she had not shown them, and that created a weight she was choosing to put down now. My name is Lieutenant Commander Maya Reeves. I'm a Naval Special Warfare Operator. 8 years of service. I have been here conducting an evaluation of training protocols, specifically whether demonstrated capability is recognized regardless of how it presents. The evaluation required my background to remain undisclosed. That is why I did not tell you who I was. The doc stayed quiet. Questions later, Maya said. The Admiral is waiting. She walked through the group. They parted without thinking about it. In the briefing room that followed, Dana's anger was controlled and specific and entirely legitimate. I told you things about why I left Boston PD, about what I witnessed there. You were taking notes. The help I gave you was real, Maya said, meeting her eyes directly. When Marcus was failing on the run and Grady was going under in the treading exercise, I helped because watching people drown when I can prevent it is not something I am capable of choosing to do. That was never part of any evaluation. But you were still lying. Yes. No qualification, no explanation added to the acknowledgement. Just yes. Grady Flynn was sitting with his forearms on his knees, looking at the floor between his boots, and then he looked up. You saved my life in that pool. You gave me the technique to finish when I was 2 minutes from failing. You didn't have to do that. He paused. Why? Because someone did the same for me once, when I had nothing left and was certain I was done. Another operator sat down next to me and told me I could quit in 1 minute if I still wanted to, but I could also keep going for one more minute. Her name was Commander Claire Stratton. The briefing room was very quiet. She died in Syria in March of 2022. She died because accurate intelligence she provided was dismissed. She was right about the building, and right about the explosive placement, and right about the exfiltration routes, and she died pulling people out of the rubble she had told them to avoid. She did not say the rest yet. There was a sequence, and the sequence mattered. Ethan Morse had been sitting at the end of the row with the same expression he had carried since day one. He looked at Maya and said quietly, "You were assigned to training cadre during the Hell Week cycle 3 years ago, when my brother Daniel was in the program." It was not a question. Maya looked at him directly. "I was." "They said he quit." "He didn't quit." "Then what happened?" "Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that presents in a specific range of exertion that standard screening doesn't reach. It didn't show in any of his pre-training evaluations. He collapsed on day 4 during log PT. Medical response was on scene in 90 seconds. The damage was already done." She held his gaze. "He didn't fail. He had a condition that no one knew existed until it was too late. That is not the same thing." Ethan Morse put his face in his hands. Dana, who had been maintaining her anger with the control of someone who knew how to handle difficult moments professionally, put her hand on Ethan's shoulder without a word. She looked at Maya over his head with an expression that had moved several degrees from where it had been 5 minutes earlier. It was Warren who finally broke the silence by looking toward the doorway. A man stood there who had not been present for any of the previous 3 days. 48 years old. 26 years of service, carried in the specific posture of a man who had been certain of himself for long enough that certainty had become indistinguishable from his basic structure. He said he was Lieutenant Commander Bryce Callahan. He said he was there to review evaluation methodology. He said this with the rehearsed neutrality of someone who had prepared an explanation and did not intend to deviate from it. Maya looked at him, just looked at him. She did not say Syria. She did not say March 2022, or the building, or the photographs that Claire had presented, and the plan that Callahan had refused to change because changing it would have required him to do something his ego had decided was not available to him. She looked at him the way you looked at the last piece of something that had been incomplete for 2 years, with recognition and with the particular calm of someone who had been moving toward a moment for a long time and had just arrived at it. Callahan looked back at her with something he was working very hard to present as professional assessment. Warren said, "The evaluation continues." That evening, Maya walked out into the corridor after the last administrative task of the day was complete. She stood for a moment with her back against the wall, her eyes on the far end of the hallway where the building's exterior door was propped open, and the evening air was coming through carrying the smell of salt water and the particular coolness that arrived at Coronado after 6 o'clock. Claire's dog tags were in her closed fist. She had not opened her hand since the briefing room. She stood there and thought about what Callahan's face had looked like when he stood in that doorway. Not the face of a man who had done something and did not know it was wrong. The face of a man who had known for 2 years, with complete precision, what he had done and had been carrying the weight of that knowledge in the space between where he was and where he needed to be and had not yet found a way to cross it. She understood that space. She had her own version of it. Tomorrow there was the Hill rescue. After the Hill, the office. The conversation that needed to happen with Callahan present and Prescott listening and the record open. She had been moving toward that conversation for 2 years, and it was 1 day away. 1 day was a distance she knew exactly how to cover. She pushed off the wall. The exterior door was 15 feet ahead. Through it, the Pacific, doing what it always did. She walked toward it. Part 3, Strength Serves. The hill behind the facility did not announce its difficulty. It simply presented itself steep grades and loose shale chaparral and scrub oak, the kind of terrain that was navigable in daylight, and something else entirely after dark. Most of the recruits had not been on it. Most of the recruits had been told to be in formation at 0531, which gave them 12 minutes from the time the emergency call came through the facility's radio network to the time they moved out, and 12 minutes was exactly enough to understand the situation and not quite enough to fully absorb it. 2 candidates from a separate training cohort. Night navigation exercise. One had gone down a slope he could not see clearly and stopped at the bottom of it with a tibia that was no longer structurally sound. The other had stayed with him, which was correct, and which also meant 2 people were stationary in terrain where stationary meant cold. Temperature at elevation 38 degrees and dropping. Weather building from the northwest. Standard search and rescue deployment time 90 minutes. The candidates did not have 90 minutes before the equation changed. Admiral Prescott made the call at 05:23. Maya had the team moving at 05:31. She briefed them while they geared up. Marcus would navigate his compass. Work had developed dramatically under pressure, and 3 days of operating as a physical body in terrain had given him a spatial awareness that translated well to this kind of movement. Dana would handle communications. Grady would carry the medical pack and heavy extraction equipment. Ethan would read the ground. Callahan was at the staging area with his hands clasped behind his back. Prescott had been clear the previous evening Callahan was an observer. If he deployed under Maya's command. The sentence had been delivered without emphasis, which was how Prescott delivered things he intended to be understood as final. Callahan had not objected. He did not object now. Maya looked at him, once assigned him a position in the formation behind Grady, and turned toward the ridgeline. The team moved out at 05:34. The terrain was honest about itself. The trail degraded to a track, and then to a suggestion, and then to nothing navigable in the first 40 minutes, and Marcus was working, compass and terrain feature, simultaneously calling his decisions aloud, and as Maya had instructed, creating a shared picture of position that kept the whole team oriented, rather than dependent on any single point of knowledge. The wind had moved to their left face, temperature reading 34 degrees on Dana's wrist unit. The chaparral grabbed at their legs, and the shale on the steeper sections required attention that competed with the urgency of the timeline. The team managed both because they had spent 3 days learning the particular discipline of doing several hard things at once without letting any of them collapse. Callahan moved through the terrain without difficulty. He had 26 years of field time and maintained his physical standards seriously. He said nothing. He watched Maya's back as she moved up the column, adjusting pace and direction, with small signals that the team read and responded to without needing them explained. At minute 41, Ethan Morse stopped. He had been watching the ground on the left side of the track with the focused attention he gave to rip current patterns, the kind that was not dramatic but was absolute. He crouched and put his hand near a section of disturbed shale at the edge of a rock outcropping. "Here," he said. "They came through here. This is fresh." Maya crouched beside him. The disturbance was real small stones displaced in the direction of the slope, both of the kind of disruption that two people moving in the dark produced and that no one would have identified as significant unless they had learned to read ground the way Ethan had learned to read water. "Good work," she said. "Everyone converge. We track it down." The trail descended sharply for 200 meters into a shallow bowl where the chaparral thinned and a flat section of decomposed granite offered something close to level ground. They found the two candidates there at minute 57. One seated against a rock, conscious but pale, shivering with the mechanical precision of someone whose internal thermostat had been compromised. One on his back right leg splinted with a stick in a section of torn jacket by the second candidate who had done the best available version of the right thing with what he had. Marcus was beside the injured man before anyone else reached him. His hands went to the medical pack with the movements of someone who had absorbed 3 days of tactical medicine instruction and was now discovering that absorption and application were the same process under the right kind of pressure. He called what he was doing as he did it: tourniquet position, splint integrity check, thermal blanket deployment, oral rehydration for the conscious candidate. Dana had the radio out, transmitting coordinates with the clear paced delivery of someone whose voice under pressure had been trained by 11 years of situations where clarity on the radio was the difference between the right outcome and the other kind. Grady Flynn and Ethan Morse cleared a landing zone on the flat section of granite in less than 6 minutes. Chemical lights at the corners. Debris moved with the efficiency of two people who understood that efficiency in this context was not a preference but a requirement. The medical evacuation helicopter arrived at 0620. Both candidates were loaded, treated, stable. Extraction complete at 0623. The team stood in the rotor wash as the helicopter lifted and turned south, and in the silence that followed, nobody said anything for a moment because there was a kind of silence that was not emptiness, but completion, and this was that kind. Callahan was standing slightly apart from the group, his face turned toward the lightening sky in the east where the first gray was beginning to show above the ridgeline. Maya watched the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man thinking about something that had no comfortable place to go. She turned back to her team. "Good work," she said. 2 words. The team had been told clearly enough by what had just happened. She began the movement back to the facility. Prescott was waiting at the staging area. He looked at the team as they came down the last section of the access track, and he looked at them the way he had looked at Maya when she came off the rescue boat with the specific attention of a man confirming something he had decided was likely and is finding it to be true. Zero errors, he said to Maya. Different terrain, unknown variables, same result. The team was ready. The team was led. He looked at the group for a moment. Get cleaned up. My office at 900, all of you. He looked at Callahan. You too, Commander. The office was small and the morning light came through the east-facing window at a low angle that put everything in sharp relief. Prescott sat behind his desk. Mercer stood to his left. Warren was near the door. The recruits arranged themselves along the far wall. Callahan stood in front of Prescott's desk with his hands at his sides. Prescott placed Maya's evaluation documentation on the desk and turned it to face Callahan. Raw observation notes, 3 days of them, compiled into a preliminary report that was specific and measured, and that said in the precise language of documented evidence what had been apparent to anyone paying attention since the first morning. Callahan read it. The room was quiet while he read. Not the performed quiet of people waiting for something they expect. The genuine quiet of people in the presence of a moment that has its own weight. Callahan set the document down. He looked at the window. He looked at the recruits along the wall, and his gaze stopped for a moment on Ethan Morse, a young man who had been carrying the wrong version of a story for 3 years and had only recently been given the right one. He looked at him the way people looked at evidence of things they had caused but had been avoiding. Twist 6. He looked at Maya. I need to say something, he said. His voice was professional. Everything about it was professional, and underneath the professionalism was the sound of something that had been held in a specific position for 2 years by sustained effort of will and was no longer being held. Commander Stratton provided photographic intelligence of the explosive placement, he said. 95% accuracy. She outlined the trigger zone with a precision that the after-action report later confirmed was correct. She presented 3 separate exfiltration routes that would have kept the team clear of the entire area. No one moved. I kept the original operational plan, not because her intelligence was insufficient, not because the tactical picture was unclear. He paused. I kept it because accepting her assessment at that point in front of the team would have required me to change a plan I had committed to publicly, and changing it would have looked like I was deferring to a female officer's judgment over my own. That was my calculation. He stopped again. It was not a tactical calculation. It was an ego calculation, and I made it in about 4 seconds, and she died because of it. The light through the window was the only thing moving in the room. She pulled me out of the rubble, he said. She pulled 3 men out of the rubble, including me. She knew the building was going to come down. She knew exactly where the charges were. She knew, and she went back in anyway, and then the secondary charge came, and he stopped. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform. He placed a set of dog tags on the desk. The chain was worn. The tags themselves were scratched in the specific way that metal scratched when it had been carried through years of conditions that were not gentle. Commander Claire Stratton, USN blood type O positive, service number, the information that a person was reduced to when the system needed to identify them quickly in the worst circumstances. I've carried these since Syria, he said. I told myself it was respect. I understand now that it was guilt wearing the costume of respect. He looked at Maya directly. She would have wanted you to have them back. Maya crossed the room and picked up the tags. She held them for a moment, the metal warming in her palm. Then she folded her hand around them. Prescott said, Commander Callahan, your statement is noted for the record. You will provide a formal account to the review board that will be convened as a result of Commander Reeves's evaluation report. Callahan nodded. That review will be thorough, and it will examine the events of March 14th, 2022. Including the operational decisions made that day and the documentation that followed those decisions. Prescott paused. The documentation that followed those decisions will receive particular attention. Callahan said, yes, sir. He said it with the voice of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a longer time and has just put it down and has discovered that putting it down does not make him lighter in the way he imagined, because the weight leaves a shape behind it, and the shape is what you carry after. He was dismissed. The door closed. Prescott looked at Maya. Your supplemental report, the one that includes the Syria details and Callahan's name. It will be on your desk before 1700. Mercer said, that report will have consequences for your career progression. Callahan has institutional relationships at levels that will make this complicated for you in ways that are difficult to predict. There are ways to structure the documentation that preserve the analytical value without the direct attribution that, no. Mercer stopped. Claire waited 2 years for someone to listen, Maya said. I am not going to structure the documentation to make it easier for the people who should have been listening. She looked at Mercer steadily. The report will say what happened. That is the only version I know how to write. Prescott studied her for a moment with the measured attention of a man who had spent 40 years evaluating people and knew the difference between the performance of conviction and the thing itself. Dismissed, he said. All of you, except you, Commander Reeves. The room emptied. Maya stood. Twist 7. Prescott waited until the last footstep had moved down the corridor and the building had settled into its ambient quiet. Then he said, there's something you should know. Jade Webb's photograph, the one that accelerated the timeline of your disclosure. Yes, sir. I was aware of the possibility of that photograph before it was taken. Maya was still. The arrangement of the morning's schedule placed Jade Webb in the facility at a specific time. It placed you in the locker room at a specific time. I did not engineer the moment, but I did not prevent the conditions that made it possible. He paused. The evaluation had a third layer that I did not communicate to you or to Mercer. She waited. I needed to know how the system responded when confronted with truth it could not manage quietly. When the evidence was not contained in a classified report that could be reviewed by the right people in the right rooms with the right assurances of discretion. When it was public and immediate and required a response before anyone could prepare one. He looked at her. You were the instrument of that test. But you were also its subject. I needed to know if you would hold when the pressure was not hypothetical. The room was very quiet. You held, he said. Maya looked at him for a moment. Was any of it real, sir? The evaluation, the mission, Claire's documentation. Was any part of it not a test of something? Prescott's expression did not change. But something moved behind it, something that might have been the closest thing to contrition that 40 years of command decision-making had left available to him. Claire Stratton was real, he said. What happened to her was real. The need to document it and address it is real. That part was never a test. She nodded, once. Dismissed, Commander. She walked out into the corridor and stood for a moment with her back against the wall. Claire's tags were in her closed fist. The building around her had the ambient sounds of a working military facility. Footsteps, radio traffic, the distant, steady percussion of the ocean against the shore. She thought about the phone call she had been putting off. She took out her phone and called her mother. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Her mother's voice was not angry. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 20 years being afraid of a specific phone call and had arranged her life around the prevention of it, and who understood on some level she would not quite articulate that the prevention had not worked because it could not work, because the thing she was preventing was not a phone call, but a person. Her mother cried twice. Not dramatically. The specific quiet kind of crying that happened when grief that had been managed for a long time encountered something that made the management harder. Maya did not offer comfort that was not true. She said, I am careful. I am trained for this. The people with me are trained for this. Dad was careful and trained too, and I know what that means, and I am not going to pretend it means something different than it does. Her mother had been quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, he used to say the same thing. Maya stayed on the line without speaking, letting that sit between them, not trying to fix it or minimize it. The words existed in the space of 20 years of absence, in the particular grief of a woman who had loved someone who chose a life that took him from her, and who had then watched her daughter choose the same life, and who had spent years believing that a promise could be the thing standing between history and repetition. I know, Maya said finally. I know he did. They had not resolved anything in the way that resolutions worked in stories. Her mother was still afraid. Maya was still going back out. The fear and the going back were both true simultaneously and would remain true, and the relationship between them was not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be lived inside with honesty and without pretense. The promise she had made to her mother had been made out of her mother's grief, out of the hole that Fallujah had put in their lives that had never fully closed. She understood the promise. She honored the grief behind it. But she also understood in the specific and irreversible way you understood certain things only after you had lived far enough into them that a promise made out of someone else's fear was not the same thing as a promise made out of your own. She was not what her mother feared. She was what her father had built, and building it had been the work of his life, and she was not going to be ashamed of it. That was the most either of them could offer the other. It turned out to be enough. Decker found her on the dock that evening. She had come out to the water after the call. The sun was going down behind the Pacific in the way it went down on clear evenings over Coronado, with a particular extravagance of color orange, deepening to amber, deepening to the specific shade of red that appeared for about 4 minutes before the horizon took it. Decker walked onto the dock without hurrying. He sat down beside her on the edge with the careful process of a man who respected the distance between upright and seated. They sat for a moment looking at the water. "He would have been proud of you," Decker said. "He didn't know me. He knew what he was building." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. "I told you I'd been carrying something that belongs to your family." He held out a coin. It was worn nearly smooth from decades of handling. One side was still legible, the crossed anchors, an eagle of the Naval Special Warfare Trident, and below it, the embossed text Bud/S-Class 189 1993. The other side had been detailed once. The detail was mostly gone now, worn away by 31 years of living in a man's pocket, touched probably thousands of times in the specific unconscious way that people touched things, connecting them to moments that mattered. What remained on the second side was the suggestion of an image. Two hands, one reaching down, one reaching up. "Your father gave me this on the last day of training," Decker said. "Class 189. He said when you find someone who earns it, pass it forward." He didn't say a name, didn't specify anything, just that I would know when. He paused. "I carried it for 31 years. Maya looked at the coin. "That's a long time." "I didn't find anyone I was certain about." He looked at her. "Until now." He placed the coin in her palm and closed her fingers around it. She held it without speaking. The metal was warm from 31 years in his pocket. She turned it over slowly, feeling the worn surface with her thumb, the way you read something in a language you have not spoken for a long time but have not forgotten. "He used to say something," Decker said. "During training when things were very bad, he'd say strength is only worth having if you give it away." He paused. "I don't know if he said it to anyone else. He said it to me on day 6 of Hell Week, when I was face down in the sand and had decided I was done." He looked at the water for a moment. I got up. He stood. He was not a man who extended moments past their natural length, and this one had reached its natural length. He turned and walked back up the dock toward the facility, his footsteps measured and even, and receding until the sound of the ocean was the only sound. Maya opened her hand. 3 things in her palm, her own dog tags cool against the skin. Claire Stratton's tags slightly warmer from the hours she had held them. And the coin from Bud/S-Class 189, warm and smooth and worn down to the shape of everything it had passed through to get here. She sat with all of it for a while. The sky above the water was that deep blue that lasted about 20 minutes after full sunset, just before the stars became visible. The Pacific moved in the long, rhythmic way it moved in the evenings, swells from a weather system far to the northwest, rolling in with the patience of something that had been doing this since before anything on this shore had been built. The following morning, Warren was at the staging area at 0545 when the new transport bus arrived. The same bus, the same route, the same gate. A new class. 23 people with their gear and their fear and their various reasons for being here, which were as different as people were different, and which would matter enormously in the weeks ahead, even if none of them could yet articulate exactly how. They came off the bus in the usual arrangement, some talking to manage anxiety, some silent for the same reason, all of them taking their first inventory of a place that would have a significant claim on who they became. Near the middle of the group, a young woman stepped down. Slight, blonde hair pulled back under a regulation cover. Her uniform had been issued that morning, and it was standard sizing, which meant it was approximately 3 sizes too large for her frame. Her boots needed 2 pairs of socks to fit correctly. She had dealt with this before, and it showed in the particular set of her expression, not resignation but the specific patience of someone who had long ago stopped expecting the world to be arranged for her dimensions and had become exceptionally good at managing the gap. She looked at the facility the way people looked at things they had worked a long time to reach. 2 recruits near her exchanged a glance, not cruel, casual. The glance that people gave things that did not fit the expected pattern before the expected pattern had been examined. Warren was moving before the glance had finished traveling between them. He crossed the staging area at a pace that communicated purpose without urgency, and he stopped in front of the young woman with a bundle of equipment in his hands, gear he had already pulled from the supply room based on measurements from her intake form. He held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "What size do you need?" he said. The words were practical. They were a question about gear. They were also in the way that small things became large things when they accumulated over time and intention and the slow revision of assumptions, something more than that. She told him her size. He gave her the equipment. He turned back toward the formation. The two recruits who had exchanged the glance were watching Warren now instead of the woman. Their expressions had shifted into something more careful, more attentive. The expression of people who had just understood without being told that a rule of the environment they were entering was different from the rule they had assumed. The other instructors had seen it. They would see it every day going forward because Warren had decided that the staging area was the first thing that happened here and the first thing set the terms for everything that followed. Maya drove off the Coronado base in the gray early morning, heading north toward the highway that would take her to Miramar and the transport waiting there. The supplemental report had been filed. The review board had been convened. Callahan's formal statement was in the record. The investigation into the Syria documentation was active and in the hands of people with the authority and the will to pursue it. The evaluation report was classified, required reading at the Naval Special Warfare Training Command. Warren had already implemented 3 protocol changes. Navarro had redesigned the water training assessment rubric to emphasize technical proficiency over raw physical output. The supply room had been reorganized so that properly fitted equipment was available in all sizes from day one. Small things, real things, the kind that did not appear in the headline version of any story, but that accumulated into the actual substance of change, the change that was quiet and permanent rather than loud and temporary. She drove with the window down. The Pacific morning air came in cold off the water, and the bide tags rested against her sternum, all 3, plus the coin threaded onto the chain where it sat between them, smooth and warm, and carrying the weight of everything it had passed through to get here. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had submitted his BUD/S application with a start date 3 months out, and who had driven away from the base the previous afternoon with a bearing that did not belong to the man who had laughed on the bus. She thought about Dana Holt, selected for a tactical intelligence role at JSOC, who had said during their final conversation, "I'm taking the methodology with me. You didn't just document a problem. You showed how you worked around it. That's what I needed to see." She thought about Grady Flynn, recruited for Special Operations Recruiting Command, who would spend the next years traveling to job sites and high schools and construction offices. In the working-class cities, he knew the identifying the people that the standard process missed, which he was equipped to do because someone had once done the same for him. She thought about Ethan Morse, assigned as water survival instructor at Coronado, who had said in the last morning, "I'm going to teach them your technique. And I'm going to tell them that the best water operator I ever watched was 5'2" and looked like she had no business being in the pool. And then I'll show them what physics actually cares about and what it doesn't." He had paused. "Daniel would have understood exactly what you were doing here." He believed the same thing. She had not said anything. She had not needed to. The highway opened up north of the base, and she set her speed and looked at the road ahead through the long light of an early California morning. Somewhere behind her, the facility was conducting its first formation of the day. Somewhere in front of her, in a forward operating base that she would not be able to name in any context that was not classified, the next mission was being prepared. She touched the coin through her shirt. Strength is only worth having if you give it away. Her father had said that on day 6 of Hell Week to a 23-year-old man face down in the sand, and the 23-year-old man had gotten up, and 31 years later, he had given the words back in the form of a worn coin. And she was carrying both now, the coin and the words, and the image on the coin's faded surface, one hand reaching down and one hand reaching up. She thought about the young woman with the blonde hair who had stepped off the bus that morning and been handed equipment that fit. One person, one morning, one question asked correctly instead of incorrectly. That was how the foundation of a thing changed. Not in the headline moments, though the headline moments mattered. In the small moments that preceded them, that made them possible, that created the conditions under which the right things could happen instead of the wrong ones. She drove north. The Pacific stayed with her on the left, enormous, impermanent, and doing what it always did, which was endure and move and receive everything that fell into it without changing its fundamental nature. The road ahead was long. She had the coin and the tags and the words and the work, and she had the specific knowledge of someone who had paid the cost of a thing and understood therefore what the thing was actually worth. She kept driving.